Hello, everyone. Welcome to another great old episode of Policy War. I am your co-host, Matthew. In today's episode, we will be discussing the Electoral College, everyone's favorite. Every 4 years, we like to talk about it and fight about it. And then if our candidate wins, you know what? Forget about it. It's perfect. If they lose, it's flawed. We'll moan. But next election, everything's okay. Anyway, as I said, I'm Matthew. I'm the kind of central co-host with the libertarian slant. I'll let my other co-hosts introduce themselves here.
I am John. I offer the conservative perspective on this podcast.
I am Russell, and I give the perspective of progress on this show. Thank you very much.
Okay, so to give a quick synopsis of the Electoral College, those of you who were born in the United States and took a civics class probably know it's the way we select our president. All 50 states get what's called electoral votes based upon the number of representatives and number of senators that they have, which is determined every 10 years with the census. So every presidential election, we have these states determine the electors, which really just cast the vote for whoever wins the popular vote of their state in most situations, unless you're Nebraska and Maine, in which case it's proportional. These people come together and throw their votes at whoever wins the popular vote within their state. Some of the common arguments against this, of course, is that we end up with presidents who lose the popular vote but win the electoral vote, and causes a rift, causes people on either side of the aisle when their candidate loses to call the election fraudulent or improper, causes indecency. It's a real riveting issue in the United States. The one we have nowadays is a slightly modified version from the one we had in the past when our founders created the system. The Electoral College we have today is the same with a few structural changes since the one that was adopted in 1787 with the Constitution. Of course, there have been some changes over time, but it's mostly stayed the same despite technological advances. Originally, when the Electoral College was created, they were trying to determine a system in which Congress did not have too much power selecting the executive branch. Also, something that would not lead to a total direct democracy where you have mob rule. So the only solution they could think of at the moment was something in which the states would choose electors, and these electors, who would be more educated, hopefully, would be able to speak for the people with their votes and represent the populace. Now, of course, that makes sense back in 1787 and when it was first used in 1789, but it has created some issues over time. One such example is parties and the winner-take-all system. Back in this time frame, there were not political parties. So whenever people were running for president, you had 5 or 6 candidates. And so whenever you had these 5 or 6 candidates, you'd have a variety of choice. It wasn't partisan as in today, where it was one person over another. There was more variety. There wasn't as much of an uproar or upset that we have today when one person pulls ahead. Another thing is the winner-take-all system, which developed during the 1800 election when John Quincy Adams was running against Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson lost due to 2 electoral votes going to John Quincy Adams from Virginia. Since the people of Virginia were upset with that, when the next election came around, they changed their policy for their state to be winner-take-all. And of course, when that happened, all other states followed suit, creating the winner-take-all system we have today. Now, of course, there's many arguments for keeping or getting rid of the Electoral College, but I believe that the other co-hosts here will have their own reasoning behind why they may support or disavow the Electoral College. So defending the Electoral College will be John here.
Here in the United States, we have a very unique blend of consensus and majoritarian systems. Majoritarian systems operate almost exclusively off of 51% can rule, And consensus systems are more concerned with building broad appeal. This is perhaps no clearer than in our two houses of Congress, where one is elected proportionate to population, and in that particular body, it is a very majoritarian rule, in that the majority of that body can gain its objectives. In the Senate, this is different. In the Senate, we have two members from each state, and in that particular body, there is a lot of rights afforded to the minority. So the majority is significantly less able to bowl over any opposition. And so we have tried to combine the majoritarian and consensus models. Why? Because the United States was not engineered to be a well-functioning democracy. It was engineered to create a system wherein no one person nor large group of people could gain tyrannical power. It was intended to dilute power away. The Electoral College is a part of that important system. Now, I will digress. There are several elements of the Electoral College that I'm sure my co-host will love to bring up at certain points during this podcast. There is the straw man argument that it is purely there because the founding fathers did not trust the populace and wanted to put it in the hands of several men. Yes, that is to some degree there, but it is certainly not the only reason behind the Electoral College. What are the reasons behind the Electoral College? To level the playing field, to ensure that there is some manner of consensus within the voting system for the United States president. The Electoral College levels the playing field to some degree by making sure that the smaller states with significantly smaller populations are not completely overrun by the larger states with larger populations. This is done because the United States is not a unitary system, much as people seem to enjoy ignoring this fact. The United States is a body of united sovereign entities called states. These are not simple administrative districts. These are sovereign entities unto themselves. And so it is therefore important to ensure that each state is afforded at least some manner of power in deciding the next president. Under a system that does not have an electoral college, under something like a national popular vote, we would see very small sections of the country with large populations controlling the executive branch. Now, I am certain at some point in this podcast, someone is going to say the line, land doesn't vote. No, land doesn't vote. And that's why we don't draw out tracts of land and apportion votes that way. We have sovereign entities called states. And within these states, we draw the lines and we apportion power so that we can level the playing field somewhat to ensure that small states are not constantly bullied by the larger states.
So, I am the other host John kept referring to. I do agree with some things, and I'll start with that. The U.S. was not engineered to be a well-built democracy. This is very true. Only white male landowners could really vote back when the U.S. was created about 230 years ago. So this is true. It was not a well-built democracy. To argue that the U.S. is not a unitary system, John is also correct in that fact. I will say that. It is a federal system. Now, getting to the point of it, the Electoral College has a different purpose now than it did 230 years ago. Because as Matthew said, parties weren't really as instituted as they are in government today. The only reason the Electoral College is still around today is because it obviously favors one political party over the other. The past 7 elections since Clinton, Republicans have not won one Electoral College vote and popular vote other than George W. Bush in 2004. Okay, so there's a reason why you will usually see conservatives before the Electoral College and saying it, while Democrats are usually against it. When you argue for the Electoral College, you are arguing for an ignoring of the popular vote. And what's the reasoning for this? These people that live on a farm in Wyoming should have their vote matter more than these millions of people that live in a capital in Sacramento. Now, that may make sense 230 years ago, when states were actually thinking about seceding from the Union, but now any state would be insane to secede from the Union with all the benefits the U.S. gets from them. So yeah, they can cry. Pretty much it's going to be the entire South that cries over and over and over again, and maybe Utah will try to join in there because they won't win presidential elections because that's just how the presidential elections work. It's usually Democratic because the majority of people usually select Democratic. But when it comes to this argument of federalism and democracy, we need to decide which one we value more. Do I care if Oregon is so mad that they don't get their voters a higher power than voters in a more popular state? No, I'm not going to be mad. And many states are realizing this. There's a national popular vote Interstate Pact, which is basically states agreeing to put all their electoral votes towards whichever candidate wins the popular vote. Currently, this has about over 180 electoral votes in it now, and it will only be truly powerful once it gets 270 or more electoral college votes. And once this is instituted, it is showing that the states right argument that John is making so coherently here is very articulate, but in all honesty, many states do not even agree with it. Many states believe the popular vote should be the number one factor in deciding the president, as is true in every other modern democracy in the world. But of course, America is not a modern democracy as much as we like to think of ourselves as one.
I know John would probably like to rebuke some of the things you have said, but before we get to that, I would like to ask some questions. John, earlier you said that land doesn't vote, but I would like to offer a different viewpoint on this. Sure, land doesn't vote, but are issues defined by geographical location? If I am from Texas, does that mean I have to hold certain interests that would be different from somebody in Wyoming, that would be different from somebody in Indiana, that would be different from someone in New York? Or will you have this broad-based system of a Republican in Texas will probably care about the same things as a Republican in New York?
Matthew, that question touches on the exact argument that my statement makes, and I'm very appreciative for that particular question. The argument behind land doesn't vote is this very simplified logic, thinking that one person, one vote is simply what makes sense. And you know what? To that simplified logic, I agree. But we also have to understand that the areas that will have the overwhelming, dominating power in an election because of that system are not going to be representative of the whole. If I am a, like you said, farmer in Wyoming, I'm going to have different values, different issues which I care about, and different electoral preferences than someone in LA County, California. And you are right that more often than not, there's going to be more of a divide on partisan lines than on geographical lines. A Republican in any one area is likely to be more like any Republican in any other area, but that is not a completely true statement. And simply look at the Republicans that exist in upstate New York and the things that they believe, and look at the Republicans that are in the middle of Mississippi, and you will see a great amount of difference. And so I believe that too often when we discuss this issue, we are speaking different languages, and that in my defense of the Electoral College, I value federalism and I value the ability of states to remain as sovereign entities more than I value some subjective measure of whose vote matters more. I don't see that as the necessary issue. I see maintaining the federal system that our founding fathers, that were certainly more far-seeing and intelligent than I, built.
So now turning to Russ here, of course, having these elections, you've had unpopular leaders win based upon, the difference between the Electoral College and the popular vote. Would you say also that there have been elections where there are unpopular leaders throughout, like on both sides?
Presidents are always going to be controversial. There's always going to be people who do not like the president that was chosen. But the real value I'm getting at here is the respect towards democratic rights in one vote, one person. That is what a modern democracy should be based out of, not really an adherence to federalism. And I want to make the point that it's not like the country's going to split up if you just establish a direct democratic vote for the president. Many states want this, as I've already stated. And I think voters will be more participatory in the process. There's plenty of proof that shows voter turnout will increase once you get rid of the Electoral College. And this simple logic. If you're a Republican, you're probably not going to go vote out in California because your vote does not matter. Democrats are going to win in California almost every time in the presidential election. Same for Utah. Democrats not going to vote for president in Utah if they think their vote's not going to matter. So if we actually want more people participating in the process and an actual equal system, then a direct Democratic vote for president is just the natural direction of the country.
Because the point I was gonna go towards is, do you think that, we can change the electoral college, but we can still end up with kind of bad candidates? I mean, if you look at the 2016 election, or you look at the 2020 election, you have a lot of people on, the political spectrum that aren't as loving of Trump and would have rather had perhaps another candidate that would not be incumbent. Maybe they would have thrown themselves behind Ted Cruz, or Rubio, or if Mitt Romney were to run, something like that. Or people on the left, maybe they don't like how centrist Biden is, and they would have thrown themselves behind Bernie Sanders or something like that. So I guess one key point I was going to try to make is that we can fix the electoral college, but that doesn't fix our problem with candidates themselves or getting people to have more variety within the marketplace.
I think it will in an indirect way. The reason America is a two-party system is in a large part because of the electoral college. People vote based on party, and third parties have absolutely no chance of winning the presidency. No chance at all, because the electoral college is elected by the parties and state legislatures. People vote based on party. If you get rid of the electoral college, then we could have candidates that are not affiliated with a party rise up and just be based on the number of votes that they get. That is how, say, Emmanuel Macron got elected in France, and he created a new party, and it was possible because there isn't an electoral college in France anymore. I mean, I want to also talk about, there was a time in history when two presidential candidates wanted to get rid of the electoral college. It was during 1969 with Nixon v. Humphrey. And there was this guy called Henry Wallace, and he was a strong advocate for segregation. He got about 54 electoral college votes because all the southern states voted for him. And this would have led to basically almost a deadlock in which the House of Representatives and Senate decide who the president and vice president is. So if you think right now we have no choice, imagine if we really don't get to choose, the House of Representatives and Senate gets to choose. The Electoral College is based on not giving people that much choice. It's not based on giving people choice.
But wouldn't that technically be federally, wouldn't that be choosing a leader by proxy though? Because you are the one who elects those officials within your state. I mean, the House of Representatives, you have a right to vote within your district, and you have a right to vote, of course, for your senator as well.
Yes, but it just goes to your point on who's elected to sit in the House. Democrats and Republicans. Of course, they would vote for the people in their party, and whichever majority party controls that House Senate would vote for the president and vice president, respective of what their powers are. All that does is restrict your choice. It does not improve it. The most choice and most power the individual can have in a representative democracy is directly electing the people who represent you.
Russell began his first segment by telling me places where he thought I was correct. I appreciate that, and I think I should return the favor in that I agree with you. Having the institution of the Electoral College does largely prevent third-party candidates from being able to gain a great foothold. Where I kind of diverge from that point is your contention that a national popular vote would allow them to come forward. Realistically, the United States presidency is a single office. And even though we do under the Electoral College system, it is a single member plurality office. The person that is able to poll a plurality of the votes, when we have the Electoral College, all of the votes will be counted. And so at some point, someone will always get a plurality. So we find in political science, and I'm blanking on the name of the actual law, and I must apologize to every political science professor I've ever had for forgetting that name. But when you have single member plurality districts, single member plurality elections, it always boils down to two candidates eventually. And it is because people want to maximize the power of their vote. People decide that, okay, I could vote for the candidate that I really, really agree with, but I would rather get the person I mostly agree with who is more likely to win rather than splitting the vote down particular issue lines. And so, as long as we have a single president, whether it's under the Electoral College system or under a national popular vote system, we're still going to see the country boiled down to two parties because that is how people maximize the ability of their vote to bring about candidates and eventually officials that best reflect their particular political preferences.
I mean, sure, we can make this an argument on how feasible it would be for a third party to win. And I'm just saying it would increase the feasibility of that. Now, with the point that it's one office, yes, but it's about competition for that office. Of course, I could make an example out of the 2016 election. Many people were saying Bernie Sanders should split off in the Democratic Party and run as a third party candidate, which would be completely idiotic. You have no chance of winning with the Electoral College, and he would split the vote. Now, if the Electoral College did not exist, he could easily do this. If anybody knows Bernie Sanders, he's pretty much, he classified himself as an independent while caucusing with the Democrats. So he actually doesn't really even consider himself that much of a Democrat, but he is forced to run inside the party to have any sort of a chance with it. This is a perfect example of how people will not split off from the two main parties because it's literally impossible to win. I can give another one. Ralph Nader won 18% of the vote in 2000. Pretty sure he didn't get enough Electoral College votes because they all went to Bush or Gore. It serves as a spoiler candidate in certain states, but it's still impossible for him to win, is what I'm saying here. At least getting rid of it would increase the chance of it happening. I'm interested in why, you believe that we still need this system today. Because yes, America is a federal society, but you have to agree we are getting more and more unitary. The federal government is getting stronger and stronger, and this seems to be a trend that the people want, in all honesty. If they didn't want it, then America would be getting more decentralized. So how can you explain this?
Well, I would like to give a quick answer to that, and then I'll also let John kind of answer. I think one of the main reasons why we kind of defend the institution that exists today is because we have to remember that it's built into the Constitution and it's hard to change. The Constitution is a document that requires, if I recall correctly, isn't it 3/4 of the states?
Yeah, 3/4, 2/3.
3/4 ratification for that. And you have parties, and whoever just won the election is unlikely to reform it. We see it every year or every election cycle. We see this happen where Donald Trump, said this is a horrible system, yada, yada, yada. He wins. Is there any reform when it comes to that? No, it goes to the back of the line. No one cares. Biden won. Did he do anything about it? No, he's not going to. Clinton complained about it. Did anything happen about it? No. If it were like a sticking issue, it would happen there. But there's so much there that it's hard to overturn.
Well, I certainly agree with you, Matthew, that the difficulty in reforming the United States Constitution is certainly a barrier to any sort of major reforms. I personally see that as a strength. I know there are others that might disagree. To your direct question, Russell, about why do I think we still need this institution when it seems as though the trend is going towards a more unitary government? Well, it's because I believe it is profoundly wrong that we proceed towards a unitary government. And I don't think that the argument, well, things seem to trend this way, is a viable argument, well, then we should go completely this way. Because I still feel like us moving that way at all is a significant problem. And I think it is at least somewhat due to the fact that we seem to have this idea that the states are supposed to be mere administrative districts. We have lost the feeling that the states are meant to be sovereign entities and that the federal system is more important, and that government should be close to the people. We instead want to rely on the federal government because that's where most of the promises of bread and circuses come from.
So, this argument of federalism has appeared in some of the past episodes we've done. And I don't believe that you can effectively argue the principles of the Electoral College. So then you go to this broader point of federalism. And federalism is still in place once you get rid of the Electoral College. It's not like we're abolishing the Senate here. Just making sure democratic rights are more equal won't lead to a unitary society. Like, nobody's saying that.
You accuse me of not being able to effectively argue the Electoral College, and so I go to the broader point of federalism, apparently not understanding the fact that the primary argument for the Electoral College is that it increases the representation of the smaller states and increases the more level playing field, which is an important tenet of federalism. And more often than not, I have to defend federalism because, Russell, I'm not sure you and those people that think like you, I'm not sure you actually have a problem with the Electoral College as an individual institution. I think you have a problem with a democracy that is not predicated on the tyranny of the majority.
That really encompasses our value difference, because federalism is instituted in multiple ways in the United States, not just in the Electoral College. The link is easy to see, but it is completely adverse to democratic rights and an equal democratic vote. That is the problem with it. You saw the Senate, you saw the 10th Amendment. My problem is that the real issue behind this all is, I want to say, not listening to the voters, which is something the Conservative Party tends to do a lot. I'm going to be honest. Conservative Party is a party of voter IDs. You remember this happened years ago. Oh my God, the dead are voting. We need to institute more voting laws. And what do you know? The poor people and minorities are the people that are most harmed by this policy. It's the Republicans that support felons not being able to vote after they get out of jail, after they serve their time, because they don't have any rights after that, apparently. It's Republicans that support the Electoral College, which constantly 5 times in history rejects what the popular vote wants. I'm seeing a pattern here, and I wonder why that is. It's because America is mostly democratic. You can adhere to beliefs all you want, but it's obvious to me that it's mostly democratic, and we can hold out this for as long as you want. But the only reason the Electoral College has survived this long is because the two parties want to support their own system. This is, again, another support of my own argument in which it would help third parties, and that's why Democrats and Republicans don't want it. But Republicans don't want an abolished Electoral College more than Democrats, and the reason is really they don't want a better representation of the popular vote.
Is this the moment where I accuse you of not being able to effectively argue your points about the Electoral College, so you resort to attacking Republicans?
I've argued them this entire... how many points have I made? I said it would increase voter turnout. I said it ignores what the popular vote wants. You didn't disagree with any of these points, did you? The only point you disagreed with explicitly was it wouldn't lead to a third-party elected candidate. I don't remember you actually disagreeing with most of my points that I said, so I've moved on, considering you already conceded. But if you have not surrendered, then please feel free.
So before we have a forest fire here, we can at least agree that within the framework, like as you mentioned in your example earlier, Bernie did run as a Democrat, but since the states have a winner-take-all system, wouldn't he technically still be able to get electoral votes if he wins states? So if the people were to actually vote for him, wouldn't he have a possibility of winning, say in Maine or Nebraska, and then if he had strong enough of a vote, other states in a winner-take-all system?
I mean, you're saying if he had a possibility. No third-party candidate has ever won the Electoral College vote. I'm saying the reason is the Electoral College is chosen by state legislators, which is completely party controlled. Party control of elections makes it so there's closed party ballots. And also, I mean, your point is it's possible. I'm saying it's not. And in other states where there is no Electoral College, there's a direct vote for president, as I gave with the example of France, it's possible to run without that. My proof is that every third party candidate that's run has really not gotten any significant amount of electoral college votes. It's always been the two main parties. I'm getting fired up because this institution's like a dead horse that I'm kicking repeatedly.
I believe that the representation there is an important aspect of federalism, and quite frankly, I value the federal system more than an appearance of democracy. I value the federal system wherein we can protect the rights of the sovereign states more than I do the idea of a direct democracy. And so
I guess my final question would be, can you think of any instances where there has been a minority interest that has been defended? Like something where the interest of one particular state was defended from being overrun, as in this case that you've brought up, like the smaller state interest not being represented by candidates that are running.
I would simply say that I think the result of that would be somewhat hidden by the fact that we have the Electoral College. And so it is then more dangerous for any one of those kind of minority issues to be ignored, because the Electoral College is the institution that to some extent forces you to focus on those issues.
Oh, hey. So does anybody have any last words? They don't have to be about the topic. You can say whatever.
I respect you, Russell. Those are my last words.
Plus respect.
What? The lies come out even further now. Look at this.
Hey, that was genuine. That was genuine. John was being genuine there.
I'm joking.
I gotta. Okay,
Listeners,
sorry there.
I get passionate just when I smell my prey. It's like I'm on the hunt, and the prey is like a weak argument, and then I just jump on it. So I respect you, John. I separate the argument from the individual, even though it can seem like I'm attacking the individual. I'm not. We just have different values. You stated explicitly you value federalism over democracy, which is insane to me. I believe this country was founded on democracy more than federalism. Obviously, that's why people left England in the first place, so they could actually have some democratic participation in government. But we can agree to disagree on this. And
well, I certainly agree that I do my best to separate the arguments from the individual. And as I've already said, I have great respect for Russell, and I do believe that all of his beliefs are very closely held. I think they are backed up by very logical conclusions based upon how he perceives the world. I disagree with many of those conclusions, and I do think that the federal system, at least at the level of the national government, the federal system is far more important than any democratic elements, because the primary democratic elements, especially the early United States, were supposed to be state by state with the government that's very close to the people. But I fully understand, especially as the federal government gets more power, wanting to put more democratic elements into that particular selection system. I understand that conclusion. I just don't necessarily agree.
My final words are, I'm glad that we can all be happy to agree to disagree. That is a beautiful thing. No punches thrown, no people knocked out, nothing stupid. We're just having a grand old time. Well, I guess on those words, that sums up this episode of Policy War. A little bit of fighting here and there, but we're all good buds. So thanks for listening. Have a nice week.